I prepared for this. For almost 2 years, I prepared. Most people, when they finally see the thing they feared coming true, freeze. They panic. They react. I didn't, because by the time my son-in-law showed up at the storage facility on Merchant Road with a pair of bolt cutters and a story about being authorized by the family, I had already talked to my attorney 3 weeks prior. I had already changed the registered address on the LLC, and I had already installed a camera above the unit's roll-up door that fed directly to my phone. I was sitting in my kitchen drinking coffee when the notification buzzed. I set the mug down. I watched the footage, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not anger, not even satisfaction, just a quiet, tired kind of clarity. Like when a storm you've been watching build on the horizon for months finally makes landfall, and the worst part is that you were right all along. Let me go back. My wife, Lorraine, died 9 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. Our son Nathan was 26 at the time. Our daughter Abby was 23. I won't spend too long on those months because that grief isn't what the story is about, but you need to understand that after Lorraine passed, the three of us, me, Nathan, Abby, became something tighter than we'd been before. We had dinner together every Sunday. I taught Nathan how to handle the property taxes on the house. I helped Abby move 4 times in 5 years because she couldn't find her footing, and I never once complained about loading a truck. We weren't a perfect family. No family is. But we were honest with each other, and we showed up. That mattered to me more than anything. The storage unit on Merchant Road. I'll explain that in a minute. But first, you need to know about the building. 17 years ago, when the real estate market in our part of Ohio was in a particular kind of lull, I bought a small commercial property. 2 stories, 8 units, built in the 1960s, needed work. I paid $340,000 for it, took out a modest loan, spent the next 4 years renovating it unit by unit, while still working my day job in facilities management. By the time I retired, that building was generating about $62,000 a year in net rental income, and its appraised value had climbed to just over $1.1 million. I never told either of my kids about it, not because I was hiding it from them exactly. More because I'd watched what the expectation of inheritance did to other families. Cousins who stopped speaking, siblings who lawyered up before a parent was even gone. I didn't want my children making life decisions based on money they hadn't earned yet. I wanted them to build their own lives first. The building would be there when the time was right. I held the property through a single-member LLC registered in my name, Lockhart Property Holdings. I kept the LLC documents and the rental income in a separate account Abby and Nathan didn't know existed. The storage unit on Merchant Road held the physical files, lease agreements, maintenance records, insurance documents, correspondence going back to the first tenant. Old-fashioned maybe, but I trusted paper more than I trusted clouds. I had mentioned the storage unit to Abby once, offhandedly, years before all of this. Told her I kept some of your mother's things there, along with business records. That was true. Both parts. But I didn't elaborate, and she didn't press me. She pressed her husband instead, apparently. And that was the beginning of everything. Abby met Cody at a friend's wedding in the spring of 3 years ago. She was 33. He was 33. He came across, at first, as exactly the kind of man I would have hoped for. Steady, sociable, said the right things at the right times. He'd worked in financial sales, he told me. Currently between positions, but had a few things in the works. He drove a newer truck, dressed well, laughed easily. I noticed things over the following months, but I told myself I was being a protective father. Overly cautious. Lorraine would have told me to give him a chance. I gave him a chance. He and Abby got engaged 14 months after they met. The wedding was the following September, 70-some guests, outdoor ceremony at a venue outside Columbus. Nice day. I danced with my daughter and tried to feel nothing but happy. Mostly I succeeded. It was at the rehearsal dinner, the night before, that I first heard it. I was coming back from the restroom and passed the short hallway between the private dining room and the kitchen. Cody was on his phone, voice low but not low enough. I stopped walking without deciding to. Doesn't matter what the old man says now, he was saying. Property in Ohio appreciates. By the time we need it, that building's going to be worth a lot more than it is today. I just need her to ask the right questions. I stood there for a moment. Then I walked back to the table and poured myself a glass of water and smiled at my daughter across the room. I didn't say anything to Abby, not that night. But I called my attorney, Ed Fleischer, the following week. Told him I wanted to review the LLC structure. He asked if anything had changed. I said, not yet. Over the next few months, I watched. Cody started asking questions. Casually at first. What did I do before I retired? How did a facilities manager end up owning a house in a decent neighborhood? Had I thought about downsizing? I answered simply, I didn't lie. I just didn't elaborate. Then it got more specific. He and Abby came to Sunday dinner one evening in February, and midway through the meal, he brought up the storage unit. Abby mentioned you keep some files out at a place on Merchant Road, he said. Business records, she said. I looked at my daughter. She looked slightly uncomfortable, the way you look when you realize you've repeated something in the wrong direction. Just old paperwork, I said. Tax records, maintenance logs, boring stuff. What kind of maintenance? He asked. The kind that accumulates over a lifetime, I said. He smiled. I smiled back. After dinner, when Abby was in the kitchen and Cody had stepped outside to take a call, I went to my office and opened the top drawer of my desk. I'd started keeping a notepad in there. I wrote down the date, the question he'd asked, and his exact words as closely as I could remember them. I'd been doing this for about 6 weeks by then. I filled 3 notepads over the following year. The pattern, once I recognized it, was almost textbook. Cody slowly positioned himself as the financial decision-maker between the two of them. It started with Abby's car. He insisted on handling the financing, said he could get a better rate, put it in his name. Then her credit card got accidentally closed because he paid the wrong balance. Then she mentioned, one Sunday in the spring, that she'd given him access to her checking account to make things simpler. When I pointed out, gently, that it might be better to maintain separate accounts, she got defensive. He'd been so helpful, she said. It was just easier this way. She trusted him. I didn't push it. I wrote it down instead. I also, around this time, hired a researcher, not a private investigator in the dramatic sense. A background research service I found through Ed's office. The kind that pulls public records, court filings, prior addresses, employment history. It cost me $400. What I got back was worth considerably more. Cody had been married once before, briefly, to a woman in Indiana. The divorce had involved a contested joint account and a complaint filed, and later dropped, regarding unauthorized transfers. There was a small claims judgment against him in Kentucky from 2019 for failure to repay a personal loan. His most recent documented employer had terminated him 18 months before he'd met Abby. None of this was proof of anything criminal, but it rhymed with something I recognized. I gave Ed Fleischer the report. He added it to the file he'd been building for me. Then he and I sat down and restructured the LLC, added a management clause that would require 2-member consent for any future changes, and formally documented my intent to gift the property to both Abby and Nathan equally upon my death, through a trust, bypassing probate entirely. Then I waited to see what Cody would do next. The shift happened about 16 months into the marriage. Things between Abby and me had grown strained, not because of anything said directly. Cody was too careful for that. But she started canceling Sunday dinners. She stopped asking for my opinion on things. When I called, she seemed distracted, guarded, like someone who'd been told to watch what she said. I didn't blame her. I'd read enough about financial and emotional coercion by that point to understand that what I was watching wasn't stupidity. It was erosion. Slow, patient, deliberate erosion of everything that had made her feel safe, thinking for herself. Nathan called me one Thursday evening and said Abby had told him I was difficult to be around lately. I hadn't seen her in 5 weeks at that point. I sat with that for a long time after I hung up the phone. Then I picked up the notepad and kept writing. The first direct move came in October. Cody called me himself, not Abby. Him. and said they'd been talking about the future, about Abby's inheritance, and he wanted to sit down and plan together. He used that phrase 3 times. Plan together. He said it would give Abby peace of mind to understand what she'd have access to eventually. I said I appreciated the thought and I'd have my attorney reach out to schedule something. He paused. You don't need an attorney for a family conversation. I find it helpful, I said. He laughed like I'd made a small joke. I didn't laugh back. Ed sent a letter the following week asking for any communication about the estate to go through the office. Cody never responded to it. Abby called me, upset, saying I was making things cold and formal. I told her I loved her, and that this had nothing to do with how I felt about her. 2 weeks later, the call came from the storage facility. The property manager at Merchant Road Self-Storage was a woman named Sandra. She'd worked there for 11 years and knew every customer's face. She called my cell at 9:47 in the morning. Mr. Lockhart, she said, your son-in-law is here. He's asking about your unit and he has tools. I don't know if I should be calling the police or you first. You called the right person, I said. Do not open the unit. Tell him the account holder has been reached and is on his way. I called Ed from the car. Then I called the non-emergency line for the local police department and explained that I had a security camera recording of an unauthorized individual attempting to access a locked storage unit I owned and that the individual was still on site. They said they'd send someone. When I pulled into the Merchant Road lot, Cody was still there. He parked his truck across 2 spaces the way he always did. He was standing outside the gate, and when he saw me, he spread his hands like we were 2 reasonable men who'd had a miscommunication. I just wanted to take a look, he said. Abby asked me to check on some of her mother's things. Abby's mother's things, I said, are in my home. He shifted. There might be some overlap with estate. There's no estate, I said. I'm alive. We stood there for a moment. Behind him, I could see the bolt cutters leaning against the side of his truck. You want to tell me why you brought those? I said. He looked at them like he'd forgotten they were there. Force of habit, he said. I do home repair. The police cruiser turned into the lot before I had to respond to that. Nothing criminal happened that day, technically. No lock was cut. No unit was opened. Cody spoke to the officer politely, said it had been a misunderstanding, that he wasn't aware the unit was restricted. The officer noted the bolt cutters, noted the camera footage I showed him on my phone, took down both our names, and filed a report. Cody left without saying another word to me. I stayed and talked to Sandra for a few minutes. I thanked her. I told her that if anyone besides me or my son Nathan ever inquired about that unit again, to treat it as an unauthorized access attempt and call the police directly. She nodded. I had a feeling, she said, from the moment he walked up. I drove home and sat in the kitchen for a while. Then I called Nathan and told him everything. All of it. The building, the LLC, the restructured trust, the notepad, the background report, the letter from Ed, the bolt cutters. Nathan was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Dad, why didn't you tell us about the building before? Because I didn't want it to change anything between us, I said. He was quiet again. Then, it didn't. I had to put the phone down for a minute. Abby called 3 days later. She'd heard Cody's version of events, which apparently involved me being paranoid, combative, and irrationally suspicious of a man who was just trying to help his wife's aging father get his affairs in order. I didn't argue with any of it. I just said, Abby, I have a file, not a file of suspicions, a file of dates, conversations, documented actions, a background report, and an incident report filed with law enforcement. I'm not going to force you to look at it, but it's there when you're ready. She hung up. She called back 4 hours later. She came over the next afternoon. We sat at the kitchen table, and I put the file in front of her, all 3 notepads, the background report, Ed's correspondence, the police report, a printed transcript of the security camera audio from the morning at the storage facility. She read for almost 2 hours. I made coffee and let her read. When she finished, she didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, He told me you were jealous of him. I know, I said. He said you'd never been happy for me. I know. She looked up. Why didn't you say any of this earlier? It was a fair question. I thought about it a lot. Because if I'd said it without proof, I said, you would have had to choose between your father and your husband, and that's not a choice anyone should have to make on someone else's word. I needed you to be able to see it yourself. She started crying then, the kind of crying that isn't just about right now, but about all the months it took to get here. I didn't tell her it was going to be okay. I didn't know that yet. I just poured her more coffee and stayed at the table. Abby filed for divorce 6 weeks later. Cody contested it initially, talked about marital assets, commingled finances, her entitlement to future inheritance. Ed's counterpart on Abby's side of things was very good. Because Cody had put her car in his name and gained access to her personal accounts, the court looked at the financial history of the marriage quite carefully. The background report from Indiana and Kentucky surfaced through discovery. The divorce was finalized 8 months after she filed. She got her car, the furniture she brought into the marriage, and a sum that compensated for the account irregularities. He got significantly less than he'd expected. He never got within 100 feet of Merchant Road. The building on, I'll call it the Fairfield building, that's the street, is still in the LLC. Nathan and Abby both know about it now. We've had several conversations about what it means and what they want to do with it eventually. Nathan thinks we should hold it another 5 years given how the market around that corridor has moved. Abby wants to understand the operations side better. She's been coming with me on the monthly walkthroughs. Last month, we stood in the parking lot after checking on a unit that needed a new HVAC filter, and she asked me why I'd never mentioned the building all these years. I told her the same thing I told Nathan. Did you really think knowing about it would have changed us? She asked. I thought about that. About the rehearsal dinner hallway and Cody's voice. About the notepads. About Sandra's call and the bolt cutters against the truck. I didn't know, I said honestly. I wasn't willing to find out the wrong way. She was quiet. Then she said, I'm sorry it took me so long. You got there, I said. That was enough for me. I locked up the parking lot gate and we drove home separately, and I made dinner for the first time in months with someone else at the table. Nathan came. We stayed past 10 o'clock. Nobody was in a hurry. Some things I've learned, you can't protect by moving them. You protect them by staying, by watching, by writing things down and keeping your hands steady, even when you want to reach in and fix it all at once. Lorraine would have been proud of Abby for how she handled it. I believe that. I'm proud of her too. I've thought a lot about what I would have done differently. And honestly, not much. Not because I handled everything perfectly. I didn't. There were months where I watched Abby pull away and I said nothing. And that silence cost both of us time. We won't get back, but the core of it, the patience, the documentation, the decision not to move until I could show her rather than just tell her, I'd do all of that again. Here's what I've come to understand about people like Cody. They rely on the fact that most of us don't want to believe what we're seeing. It's uncomfortable to sit with suspicion. It feels disloyal, even paranoid. So we talk ourselves out of it. We extend the benefit of the doubt one more time, and then one more time after that, and by the time we've run out of doubts to extend, the other person has had 2 years to move things around. I wasn't smarter than Cody. I want to be clear about that. He was practiced at this. The background report showed me that. He'd done it before, not identically, but the shape of it was the same. What I had that he didn't account for was time. I was 63 years old, and I had seen enough of life to know that the truth doesn't usually announce itself. It accumulates. It shows up in small contradictions, in the way someone changes the subject, in the particular kind of confidence a person has when they believe no one is paying close enough attention. I was paying attention. That's not wisdom I was born with. It came from decades of watching things, buildings, tenants, contracts, people. Facilities management sounds like a boring career, and mostly was, but you spend 30 years responsible for things that other people depend on. You start to understand that neglect is always more expensive than maintenance. That applies to a boiler system, and it applies to a relationship, and it applies to a threat you're not ready to name yet. The notepad, was maintenance. The background report was maintenance. The call to Ed Fleischer the week after the rehearsal dinner, maintenance. What I want Abby to take from all of this, if she takes anything, is not that she should have seen it sooner. Coercion works precisely because it's gradual. You don't notice the temperature rising 1 degree at a time. What I want her to take is that she did, eventually, sit down at that kitchen table and read 2 hours worth of evidence and then make a hard decision and follow through on it. That takes a kind of courage that has nothing to do with age or experience. That's just character. She had it in her all along. She just needed the space to use it. And Nathan, the way he responded when I finally told him everything, the first thing he said wasn't about the building or the money or any of it. He asked why I hadn't told them sooner. He was worried about me. That matters more to me than I know how to say. I think about the rain sometimes in all of this. She would have spotted Cody faster than I did, probably. She always had a sharper instinct for the performance behind the charm, but I also think she would have made the same call I did. Wait, watch, document. Because she understood that protecting someone doesn't mean deciding things for them. It means making sure they have what they need to decide for themselves. That's all I did. I kept the file, I kept my hands steady, and I kept the gate locked until my daughter was ready to see who'd been standing outside it.